In Tokyo, you can rent a cuddle. Loneliness is a recognized health issue in Manchester, and perhaps nobody is as isolated as a migrant worker in Shenzhen. But can we really know what makes a city lonely? A 2016 report by Age UK noted that there are higher incidences of loneliness in cities, but precisely what brings it on is surprising. The same report found that gender and education are largely irrelevant, except for those with the highest level of education who are often lonelier, and that household income and caring for a pet also have little effect. Urban life is more stressful than rural life, but whether it's lonelier is a point of debate among social scientists. Loneliness is a complex issue. I made a video about the most depressing city in the world, Norilsk, Russia. In this isolated tundra in the Arctic Circle in Siberia, you can easily assume these people, like others located on the edges of the world, would be the loneliest. However, this is not always the case. This Guardian article begins with Henry Miller, an American novelist, who writes that in New York, I have always felt lonely, the loneliness of a caged animal. Miller saw himself as an outsider, forever and ever the ridiculous man, the lonely soul, and it was his hometown that brought on this fever of loneliness. Could Miller's words be evidence that New York, where countless people have gone to find fame, work, love, and even themselves, is the loneliest city in the world? Or is it possible that the person, not the place, was the source of Miller's discontent? And if so, what is the loneliest city? And what impacts loneliness, and how does this play out in cities? The size of a household inversely affects how you feel. The smaller the household, the more lonely it tends to be. And people who rent or own a home are lonelier than those with a mortgage, perhaps because cities with lots of renters such as London, which is expected to have 60% of residents renting by 2025, have greater transience and potentially lower community engagement. New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco have rental figures hovering in the mid-50s. Renters dominate in German cities too, a long-term trend attributed to low rents and housing policies, but one that may end up influencing neighborhood engagement. One thing is certain, the percentage of those who live alone has increased dramatically. In the US, 27% of people live alone, up from 5% in 1920, and in New York City, it's roughly 1/3. The same trend is evident in Canada and even more pronounced in Europe. 58% of people in Stockholm live alone, a figure that is considered the highest in Europe. In many cities, the trend is here to stay. The Australian Bureau of Statistics estimated that there will be 1.3 million more single occupancy households by 2025. A jump of roughly 60%. Obscured by those figures, however, is the assumption that living alone leads to loneliness. Two things the sociologist Eric Kleinenberg, author of Going Solo, says are often conflated. He says, in fact, there's little evidence that the rise of living alone is responsible for making us lonely, he wrote. Research shows that it's the quality, not the quantity, of social interactions that best predicts loneliness. What matters is not whether we live alone, but whether we feel alone. The demographic that most reports feeling lonely are older people, and they do often live alone. In Stockholm, 35% of people over the age of 75 experience loneliness. In Australia, city dwellers have fewer friends than they did 2 decades ago. In the US, a troubling 1 in 5 people said that they only have one close friend. Or consider the city of Vancouver, which struggles not only with affordability, as it was recently crowned the most expensive city in North America, but also with friendliness. The Vancouver Foundation think tank asked community leaders and charities to identify the biggest issues facing Vancouver, and were told it wasn't homelessness or poverty, it was isolation. Many Tokyoites long for friends so dearly that they're willing to hire them. American writer Chris Cullen, intrigued by Japanese affection for higher industries such as cuddle cafes and cat rentals, spent time with the service that provides temporary friends. The largest of the rent-a-friend agencies, Client Partners, has 8 branches in Tokyo alone. Japan seems to have become somewhat famous for its loneliness, which some say has become a widespread societal condition, a plight which strikes significant portions of the population across all demographics. The hikikomoro, a class of social outcasts, typically male, suffer from such severe social withdrawal that they remain housebound with little to no human interaction for years on end. The government estimates that there are between 1 and 2 million of these individuals in the country. Japan expresses other indirect indicators of loneliness, including a high number of single-person households, which could rise to 40% of the population by 2040, long average working hours, and a heavy reliance on technology to supplant social voids. As Japanese university students enter their final year, the job hunting season begins. Nabbing a job out of university not only promises income and a degree of social security, but also allows individuals to fit neatly into the group-oriented society. It's a time of fierce competition in the job market, and for those that miss out, an opportunity squandered. This was even truer for the lost generation, now well into their 40s, who who were job hunting during unemployment ice age, and many of the hopefuls left wanting descended into isolation. And then there were those who lost their jobs as a result of the bursting bubble. And again, mostly men whose status in life was indistinguishable from their status in the workplace, company men who lived lives of sweet material decadence with the belief that it was all too big to fail. As the job market dried up in the 1990s, many were left unemployed or relegated to low salary positions with limited authority. And for some, the shame was too great to bear, causing them to withdraw from the society that betrayed them. Other factors have contributed to Japan's loneliness problem, such as the displacement of individuals through natural disasters, and increased congestion and cost of living in cities have eroded the traditional three-generation structure of Japanese households. Across the Sea of Japan, there's a different problem: large-scale migration. As rural China moves to big cities such as Shanghai and Beijing, they encounter isolation on an epic level. As of 2012, a staggering 230 million people had migrated from the countryside to cities. More than half the country's population now lives in cities, up from 1/3 in 1990. Known as the floating population, they can find themselves in low-quality, high-density housing, subject to discrimination and at risk of low social participation, especially if they move frequently. One corporation in the factory city Shenzhen houses more than 200,000 employees in dormitories. If life in China's megacities illustrates anything, it might be that loneliness is often due to circumstance. This wouldn't surprise Olivia Lang, who writes, "The thing with cities is we are absolutely surrounded by people. We can see other people living richer, more populated lives than our own. At the same time, we can feel very exposed. There are lots of eyes on everyone. That is why the loneliness of the city has a particularly distinct tang to it. Loneliness, however, is often like bad weather. It passes through our lives." So are people in Shanghai or Berlin lonelier than those in Stockholm or Vancouver? One of the field's leading researchers, the University of Chicago's John Cacioppo, wrote the book on the subject, Loneliness. His research disputes the idea that urban life is inherently lonelier than rural life, and he declined to play favorites and pick just one city. "You raise an interesting question," he says. "Unfortunately, we have no data with which to address it." So what do you think is the loneliest city in the world? Let me know in the comments, and that's going to be it. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe for more Squalid Suburbs.